cord. Okay, today's daf is Nun Aleph. We left off at the top of Nun Aleph yesterday with the words Ba'u Minei Merav Chisda. Ba'u Minei Merav Chisda. This is 5 lines, or starting 4 lines actually, down from the top of Nun Aleph, Amud Aleph. So they asked from Rav Chisda, Misha chal v'shata v'lo berech. If somebody eats and drinks and they forgot to say any beracha, Ma'u shiachzor v'varech. Should the person go back and say a beracha now? Amar lahu, he said to them, Misha chal v'shum v'rechon odef. Yachzor v'yochal shum acher kedei she'rechon odef. If a person eats garlic and he has bad breath, should he go back and eat more garlic so he has more bad breath? In other words, if a person started eating and they forgot to say the beracha, and there's more food to be eaten, of course you should say a beracha. We don't say, like, for example, that if a person eats an apple, takes a bite out of an apple, and he forgot to say a beracha, oh, you already started eating it, so it's too late. We don't think about it that way. We say, in the middle, you should eat, in the middle of your eating, you should say the beracha whenever you remember. And Amar lahu, okay, so that's what he said to them. So Amar Ravina said, Hilkach afilu gamar seudato yachzor vivarech. So therefore, says Ravina, even if he completely finished his meal, he should go back and say a beracha. In other words, let's say a person finished the entire apple, all he has is the core now. Should he say Bari Priya Etz? He said, yeah, Titania Tezna Braita, Taval ve'ala. When a person goes into the mikveh, he immerses, he comes out, Omer ba'aliyato, Baruch asher kideshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu ala tevilah. When he comes out, he says the blessing on tevilah. So what do you see? Even when you're completely done with the mitzvah, it's still possible to say the beracha. So too, even when you're completely done with the apple, or whatever you're eating, you should be able to say the beracha, even though you forgot in the beginning. And Rashi explains, why is it that in Tevilah, why is it in immersion in the mikveh that we say that the person says the bracha afterwards? So Rashi says that this goes back to what we learned in the 3rd parak when we first started this Daf Yomi class, which is that the Baal Keri, the person who has a seminal emission and is not allowed to say brachot or mention Hashem's name, so therefore he has to immerse first, and then when he comes out, he's allowed to say Hashem's name, say the bracha. Tosafot says actually it could be referring to Tevilat Gerim, to the immersion of converts, because converts cannot say the bracha Shir Kiddishanu before they immerse because they're not Jewish yet. So when do they say the bracha? When they come out. And according to Tosafot, this is the reason why the Chachamim decided that for all Tevilot, for all immersions, we should say the bracha afterwards. And Netilat Yadayim also. When we do Netilat Yadayim, we wash our hands, and afterwards we say the bracha. He says it's all based on this idea that since for Gerim, they immerse and then afterwards say the beracha, so we apply that to everyone. However, that's not really the Sephardic custom. According to Sfaradim, for Tevilah, for example, going to the mikveh, the woman will say the beracha before she immerses. And the only exception to the rule is Gerim, when they immerse, they say the bracha afterwards. So the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch don't accept this reasoning, but this is what's found in Tosafot here. No, we don't say it. Nowadays, not nowadays, but if you were really becoming tahor in the times of the Beit HaMikdash. But if you were really becoming tahor in the days of the Beit HaMikdash, you would have said it. It's just that we're not really becoming tahor.
We don't say it. We never say bracha.
Why we say it afterwards?
So Tosafot wants to say that the reason is similar to Tevilah, just like immersion, also washing hands. No, the Shulchan Aruch says that the custom is really me'ikar adin. Really, a person should say the beracha al netilat yadayim before he washes his hands. But just like every other mitzvah. But he says since people come with dirty hands sometimes, so it's not so nice to say the beracha with dirty hands. So therefore, the custom is to wash hands and then to say the beracha. But really, technically speaking, you would say the beracha before. That would be the normal way to do it. But we have an exception because of a custom not to say the beracha until after you wash your hands, only because people have dirty hands. That's the reason he says it. So anyway, the Gemara goes on. So Velohi, but the analogy Ravina is trying to bring here is not a legitimate analogy. Why is it not a legitimate analogy? Because over there, when it comes to Tevilah, when it comes to immersion of a convert in the mikveh, the person wasn't able to say the beracha before they went in. But here, the person had the ability to say the beracha. In other words, if you're in a situation where by definition you can't say the beracha before you do the mitzvah or before you do the activity, so then doing it afterwards is acceptable. But in this case, he could have said the bracha before he ate the apple. He could have said the bracha before he finished the apple, at least. He didn't. He did. Now he's done with the apple. We don't say, oh, he was forced to say the bracha after eating the apple. We don't look at it that way. We say that he was he neglected to do it, and therefore he lost the opportunity. And that's really the halacha. As long as you're eating, you can still say the bracha. If you finish, you are not able to say the bracha anymore. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught aspargus, which sounds like asparagus, but it's actually not. It's some kind of a mixture of either beer or wine with other medicinal herbs or other kinds of things for health reasons. So it says yafel alev, it's good for the heart, v'tov la'inayin, and it's good for the eyes. And it's also good for the intestinal tract. It's good for the stomach. And if you have it regularly, it's good for your whole body. But if you drink too much and you get drunk, it's bad for your body because it's actually it contains wine. So if you overdo it, it's like having too much Dimetap or something like that. I guess
medicine.
Too much.
It wasn't. Well, right. I mean, it depends what you think of as really medicine. Because back then, I don't know if they had such a category as really medicine because they didn't have pharmaceuticals. Most of their remedies were like herbal remedies or natural remedies. So this was considered some kind of you could think of it as like a one of those health drinks that people have, with nutrients in it that they would take for health purposes. So it's midikatane yafil alev. So from the fact that it says it's good for your heart, miklal de b'chamra askinan, we must be talking about the one that's made with wine, because wine is v'yayin yisamach levav enosh. Wine is good for the heart. It's supposed to be good for you. So, and actually, even today they say that having a glass of wine is supposed to be good for your heart. So there's some scientific basis for that. So v'katane v'kos sheken levnei me'ayim, but it says that it's good for the stomach. And we learned lila'at yafeh, liramat kasher. What does this mean? Lila'at. La'at means for the lev, ayin, techol, right? For the heart, the eyes, and the spleen. But it's bad for ramat. Ramat stands for rosh. It gives you headache, because wine can give you a headache. Me'ayim for the stomach, and also for tachtoniot, which means hemorrhoids. Okay, apparently it had other side effects. So this is a medicine that has some side effects. So it's difficult for those things. So kitan yahahi b'myushan. When is it good even for the stomach? So how could we say that this asparagus is good for your stomach? Because if we're talking about wine, then it should say that it's good for your heart, but it's bad for your stomach. But b'myushan, when the wine is aged wine, it's okay for you. As we learned in the Mishnah, konam yayin shani to'em. If a person says, I won't drink wine, they make a neder, they make an oath, I'm not going to drink wine. Shayayin kashilav me'ayim. But they add in their neder a reason. They say, why am I not going to drink wine? Because it's bad for my stomach. And somebody says, Amrulo, they say to him, but aged wine is good for your stomach. It's only new wine that's bad for your stomach. Vishatak, and he didn't say anything. Then we say that he's allowed to drink, even though he said a neder, I'm not going to drink wine, since he gave a reason, and the reason was because it's bad for your stomach. And somebody said to him, hey, aged wine is not bad for your stomach, and he didn't respond. He didn't say, well, I want to include aged wine too. That means that the reason was part of his oath. The reason was part of the neder, and therefore he's allowed to drink old wine. Shema mina, we see from here that old wine is good for the stomach. So, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught Shishat Dvarim Nemru Ba'aspargus. They said 6 things about this special medicinal drink, aspargus. En shotinoto ele keshu chai. We only drink it when it's chai. When it is yayin chai, it's wine that is not mixed. Remember, we talked about the wine concentrate that they would mix with water. So it's saying that it has to be the wine concentrate, umaleh, and you have to drink it out of a full cup. Mikablo biyamin, you take it with your right hand. V'shoteo b'smol, but you drink it holding it in your left hand. Ven mesechin acharav, don't talk after you drink it, because I guess you got to let it run through your system. Ven mafsikin bo, and don't interrupt in the middle of drinking it. Ven machzirin oto el mishin etanolo, and you don't give it back except to the person who handed it to you. V'rak acharav, and you should spit your saliva out after you drink it. And you shouldn't follow it up except with a food that is of the same nature as whatever the asparagus was composed of. So we said that it has some kind of a alcoholic base, and it also has some other medicinal things in it. So if it was wine, that would mean grapes, I guess. If it were beer made from dates or from figs, then you would have to eat figs or dates afterwards to follow up with this aspargus. But it says in the Braita that you're supposed to eat bread afterwards. You're not supposed to eat a food that's the same as what's in the aspargus. You're supposed to eat bread. Lo kasher, no problem. If you have chamra, if you have the wine-based aspargus, you're supposed to have bread afterwards. If you have one of the other fruit beer-based aspargus potions, or whatever you call it, mixtures, then you would have to have something that corresponds to its nature. So this is medical advice. So Tanichada, one Braita says, Lila'at yafeh, liramat kasher, like we said before, for the heart and the eyes and the spleen it's good. For the head and the stomach and for hemorrhoid issues it's bad. V'tanya idach, and another Braita says, Liramat yafeh, lila'at kasher. Another one said the opposite. That it's bad for your for the heart and for the eyes and for the spleen, and it's good for the other things, for the head and for the stomach and for the hemorrhoids. So what's the answer? Lo kashe, no problem. As we said, the first one that said it's good for your heart and eyes and spleen, that's when it's based on wine. The one that says it's bad for your heart and eyes and spleen, but it's good for your head and your stomach and for hemorrhoids, that's talking about the beer-based one, which apparently had different side effects. One Braita said rak acharav lokeh, v'tanidach lo rak acharav lokeh. One said that if you spit your saliva out afterwards, it's bad for you. You should keep the saliva. The other one said no, you should spit it, and if you don't spit it, it's bad for you. So which is correct? Lo kasher hab the chamra hab the shukra. Again, same distinction. If it was wine based, don't spit out your saliva. It's good to keep the saliva. If it's beer based, spit out the saliva. Rav Ashi says Ashtad amrat lo rak acharav lokeh. He says, now that you're telling me that I have to spit after I drink the aspargus that's beer-based, you can spit even in front of a king. In other words, even if you're in a situation where it's socially inappropriate to spit, you should do it because for medicinal reasons, for health reasons, you might be endangering yourself if you don't do it. Amar Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha. Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha said, there were three things that Suriel, the great angel who appeared to me, the malach that appeared to me, told me three things. Don't take your garment miyada shamash in the morning from the hand of your assistant, from the hand of the servant. You shouldn't put it on. You shouldn't take it from the servant and put it on. Rather, meaning you should take it yourself. You should get dressed taking the garment off of the hook yourself. You shouldn't have your servant hand it to you. Don't let somebody who hasn't washed their hands pour the water over your hands. And don't give the cup of aspargus back except to the person who gave it to you. של מלאכי חבלה, מצפים לו לאדם, ואומרים, אימתי יבוא אדם לידי אחד מדברים הללו וילכד. Because a group of shedim, of demons, or maybe a group of malachei chabala, a group of destructive angels are waiting for a person to do one of these things so they can catch him. Apparently these were considered to be things that would put you in harm's way for one reason or another, although it's not entirely clear why all of these are problematic.
The morning washing the hands.
Yeah, the washing we can maybe understand, but the why you have to take your own clothing and put them on, maybe because there was a concern that the servant didn't clean his hands. I don't know the reason. Rabbi Shimon Levi said, Shlosha dvarim sachli malach hamavet. The malach hamavet told me three things. The angel of death told me three things. Don't take your garment from the shamash, from the assistant in the morning and put it on, meaning put it on yourself, take it yourself. And don't have your hands washed by somebody who hasn't washed his hands. So he says that don't stand in front of the women when they're coming back from a funeral, because I am there, meaning I'm the malach hamavet, I'm the angel of death, and my sword is with me, and I have the ability to wreak havoc on you. So you better be careful. If you do run into the malach hamavet, what should you do? You should jump from your place 4 amot. If there's a river, jump over the river. If there's another way to go, in other words, if you run into these women coming back from the funeral and you can't get away from them, there's no way to jump, there's no river to jump over, so go a different way. And if there is some kind of a wall around, hide behind it. And if not, just turn around. If there's nowhere to hide, there's nowhere to go, just turn towards them and say, you should just say the pasuk, Yigar Hashem b'cha Satan, which is what? Yeah, that's in the Haftarah. That's right. That's in Zechariah, right? Zechariah. So
these must have been the women that were professional.
It could have been the professional criers.
Yeah. Who were always going to funerals.
Yeah, it could have been. Yeah. So there's a concern that the person will be endangered by this. So these are pieces of advice here. Rabbi Zera said that Rabbi Abau said, and some say it was mentioned in a Matnita, it was mentioned in the Tosefta. There are 10 things that they say about the cup of blessing. It requires 2 different kinds of washing, as we're going to see. Hadacha and shtifa are inner and outer washing of the cup. Chai, when you pour the cup, it should be with yain chai. It should be with the concentrate of the wine, and then you fill it with water. And you have to fill it up to the top when you're ready to say the beracha. Itur, it requires crowning, which we're going to see what that is in a second. Ve'ituf, and wrapping, we're going to see what that is too. Notlo b'shtei yadav, when you take it, you should take it in 2 hands. Ve'notno b'yamin, and then shift it to the right hand. U'magbio min ha'karkat tefach, and you raise it over the floor, or if you have a table in front of you, over the table, a tefach, a hand's breadth. V'noten enav bo, and you look at it when you're saying the beracha, because that way you won't be distracted. V'yeshomrim af mishagero b'matana l'anshei beito, and they say that you should also, some say that you should also pass it to your family members so that they can drink directly from the cup, which is the custom. It's very common when you say kiddush to pass it around to the family members to be able to partake directly from the cup. Rabbi Yochanan said, Anu ein lanu ela arba bilvad, we only hold by 4 of these that we actually practice. Hadacha shtifa chayu maleh, that you should wash it in and out, and you should start with undiluted wine with the concentrate and then fill it up to the top with water. And hadacha refers to washing the inside of the cup. Shtifa refers to washing the outside of the cup. Amar Rabbi Yochanan said, Kol mevarech al kos maleh, anybody who says the beracha on a full cup, Hashem is going to give him an inheritance without any limit. Why? Because since you didn't limit the amount of wine, you weren't stingy, you filled the cup up all the way, so Hashem is going to fill your blessing up all the way. And it's only a kos shel beracha. It doesn't say anybody who fill. It's not talking about when you fill the cup of wine that you're just having for a party. It's saying when you show honor to the mitzvah by not putting any limit on the amount of wine that you put in the cup. You're not just trying to skimp on it. Then Hashem is not going to skimp with you. Shene'emar umaleh birkat Hashem yam bidarom yirasha. It says in the berachot that Moshe Rabbeinu gave to the Jewish people, to Naphtali, that you're going to be, when you're full with the blessing of Hashem, Yam B'darom Yerasha, you're going to have, to the west and to the south, you're going to inherit. So what that shows you is there's not going to be any limit. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina Omer, Zochev Nochil Shnei Olamim. You're going to get 2 worlds, this world and the next world. Ha'olam hazeh va'olam haba. Itur, what does it mean to crown, so to speak, the cup of blessing? Rav Yehuda me'atireu b'talmidim. So Rav Yehuda said this means you should surround yourself. He would surround himself with his students when he went to say the beracha. So it means to surround. Crowning means to make a crown, to make something around you. So he says he would have the students stand around him in a circle when he would say the beracha. That was showing honor and kavod to the kos shel beracha. Rav Chizda me'atir le benatle. Rav Chizda would put smaller cups around the large cup, which oftentimes you see that people have that. They have that set up where they put the little cups of kiddush, the mini cups, around the big cup in the middle. So that's what he's talking about. Me'atreu benatle, that he would do that. Amar Rabbi Chanan ubachai. Rabbi Chanan said, and you start out with the raw wine. Okay? Amar Rav Sheshet ubebirkat haaretz. And in Birkat Haaretz, when you get to Birkat Haaretz, when you get to the blessing of Nodeh Lecha in Birkat Hamazon, that's when you fill the water to fill the wine. In other words, they would start with that concentrate and then it would fill it. Nowadays we don't have this because our wine is already diluted. It's already ready to be drunk. So we don't have this concept. Al pi Kabbalah, there are many people for Kabbalistic reasons that pour a little bit of water into the wine. But other than Kabbalah, based on pure halacha, we don't have this requirement today because our wine is already, so to speak, diluted. It's not a concentrate, so we don't have this issue. But in those days, you would have the undiluted wine, and then you would pour the water when you got to the second bracha of Birkat Hamazon. Why? To show the blessing of the land, because wine represents one of the the blessings of Eretz Israel. So to show the blessing of the land, they would add the water on that bracha and then continue with the cup, because they used to say Birkat Hamazon always over a cup of wine. Now the Rabbeinu Yonah brings another possibility, that it doesn't mean that they would actually start with the concentrate, but it means that they would start with a mixture of concentrate and water, but they wouldn't stir it until they got to the second bracha, because otherwise you won't really start with a full cup. You'll start with only a 1/4 full cup, because it was usually 3 parts water to 1 part concentrate. So the concentrate was really strong. So so you would only have 1/4 of your cup when you started the blessing if you did it that way. So Rabbeinu Yonah says actually what they would do was they would put they would put the water in, but they wouldn't stir it until they got to the second bracha. However, the Rambam seems to say not that way. He seems to say, like the pshat of the Gemara, that they would have only a quarter filled when they started, and then they would fill the water when they got to that point. Then we say ituf. What does it mean? Ituf, covering. What does that mean? So Rav Papa me'atif v'yativ. So Rav Papa would put his talit on when he would come. So when he would come to what it means wrapping or covering is he would put his talit on when he came to say the blessing on the kos shel bracha, when he had a cup of blessing.
Should be dressed appropriately.
Yeah, dressed appropriately, because Rav Asi paris sudral reshe. Rav Asi would finally put a kippah on. Okay, he would put some kind of a cloth over his head, because they didn't always wear a kippah back then. That's something that was midat chasidut back then. It was considered only the very pious people did that. So when he would come to say a blessing on a cup, he would cover his head with this kind of cloth. Notlo b'shtei yadav. You first take it with 2 hands, and then you shift it to your right hand. Where do we get this from? Amar Rabbi Chanina bar Papa, Mai Kira'ah. Rabbi Chanina bar Papa said, what is the source? From what pasuk do we learn this? Se'u yedechem kodesh uvarchu et Hashem. Because it says, lift your hands in holiness and bless Hashem. So it says both hands. Amar Rabbi Chia, so v'notno liyamin, put it in your right hand. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rishonim sha'alu semol ma'u shetisayeh liyamin. That the early people asked, the earlier generations asked, can the left hand help the right hand? In other words, can you? Let's say your right hand is too weak. Can you use your left hand and kind of support on the bottom or help with holding the cup? Amar Ravashi says, since the earlier generations weren't sure, Velo if shitlahu, and they couldn't determine the answer, as we turn to Amud Bet, we're going to go stringently and say that the right hand should not be helped by the left hand during the recitation of the Beracha. However, it is brought in the halacha that you can hold if you have the cup in your right hand, you can hold your right hand with your left hand to give it support. You just shouldn't put your left hand on the cup, because it should only be in your right hand during the beracha. A person should lift it from the ground 1 tefach, whereas the Shulchan Aruch says now we have tables, lift it from the table at tefach. Amar Bi'acha Bar B'Chanina, Mai Kira'ah, Kos Yeshuot Esa. It says, I lift the cup of salvations. So you have to lift it. Oh, V'Shem Hashem Ekra, and then I call out in the name of Hashem. V'noten enav bo, and you should look at it. Ki hechi delo nisach date mineh, so that your attention will not be distracted. In other words, you will focus on what you're saying. U'mishagro la'anshe beto, you should pass it to your family members b'matana as a gift. Ki hechi detitbarech devitu, so that his wife will be blessed. Okay, it was considered a special thing to give your wife the kos shel bracha. So Ula ikla labe Rav Nachman. Once upon a time, Ula came to the house of Rav Nachman. Karech rifta barich birkat mizonah. They had lunch together or whatever. They had dinner. They had bread, and at the end they had birkat hamazon. Yahav le kasad de birchata le Rav Nachman. So he gave the cup of blessing to Rav Nachman, because remember, the guest is the one who normally would say birkat hamazon, so he could bless the bal habayit. He could bless the host, and then when he was done with the cup of wine, he handed it to Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman said, Amar le Rav Nachman, Lishadar mar kasad de berchata li Yalta. Please send this cup of blessing to Yalta. Yalta was his wife. Rav Nachman is one of the few rabbis in the Talmud with a very famous wife. A wife almost as famous as himself. So he said to Yalta, send this to Yalta. Amar le Rav, that Ula said, Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan, this is what Rabbi Yochanan said, En pri bitna shel isha mitbarech, ela mi pri bitno shel ish, shene'emar, uvarech pri vitnecha. It says, so he said to him, this is what Rabbi Yochanan said, that the fruit of the womb of a woman is blessed because of the fruit of the man, of the stomach of the man. Shene'emar, as it says in the Berachot, uvarech pri vitnecha. Oh, I'm sorry. Uverach perivit necha. That the fruit of your stomach should be blessed. Pri bitnah lo nemar. It doesn't say hers, it says pri bitnecha. It says yours in the masculine, meaning the blessing is going to come from the man drinking the cup of blessing. And when the man drinks the cup of blessing, that blessing is going to transfer to the wife. So that's where he gets it from. So, adachi shema yalta. So, I didn't skip anything, did I? No. Adachi shema yalta. Yalta heard this exchange that Ula was saying. Oh no, I did skip something. Why don't you stop me? Okay. Tanya Namiachi, it's on the Braita. Rabbi Natan Omer. Rabbi Natan says, Minayin shein pri bitna shel isha mitbarech ela pri bitno shel ish shenemar uverach pri bitnecha. Pri bitnah lo nemar ela pri bitnecha. So it's the same idea. In other words, that so there's a support for this in the Braita that the blessing of the womb goes through the man. If the man drinks the cup of blessing, it's enough. It will transfer to the wife. Adachi shama Yalta. Yalta heard this discussion going on. Kama b'ziyara, she got up in anger, v'alta lebechamra v'tavra daled me'ah daned dechamra, and she broke 400 barrels of wine. Apparently they had a lot of wine in the cellar. She was pretty angry. She wanted to have some of that wine. Amar le Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman said, Nishader la'amar kasachrina, please send her another cup. Obviously she's really upset, and we know that we don't want to have to deal with an angry wife. So shalach la kol lahai navga de berchatahi. So he told her, all of these barrels of wine are barrels of blessing because we took the cup of blessing from them. So it's okay. Even if you don't have to take from the cup itself, take from the barrels, and that's good enough. But what did she say? So, shalechale mimahadure mile. The itinerant merchants have a lot of words, meaning Ula, who was visiting, thanks for coming in my house and coming with a lot of words that I don't like them. Umi samartute kalme, and from rags come lice. In other words, just like an itinerant merchant comes with a lot of words, rags breed lice. In other words, thanks for coming. Okay, that was her way of saying that. Okay, Abba Ravasi Rabbi Yassi said, and Masechet al kos shel bracha, we shouldn't talk once the cup of blessing is lifted, as the Shulchan Aruch says, once the person lifts the kos shel bracha, and he's about to say the blessing, whether we're talking about kiddush or berkat hamazon, he should continue without discussion. And in fact, Shulchan Aruch says that this applies not only to the one who's saying the bracha, but also to all the attendees, that as soon as the person who's saying the bracha lifts the cup, nobody should talk.
Even after my machronim, you should.
Well, that's for sure. That's a whole other thing. We've had that before. Techef and Tilat Yadayim Bracha is actually talking about my machronim is more strict. People are very strict about when they wash hands before bread, not speaking between the washing and the bread. But when they wash hands my machronim, they still talk. It's the opposite. Actually, the my machronim is more strict than the my rishonim.
What's puranut?
So we're going to get to that. Ravasi says, En mevarachin al kos shel puranut. So you're not allowed to bless on the cup of punishments. My kos shel puranut. Amar Rav Nachman. So what is that? Amar Rav Nachman b'Yitzchak kos sheni. It's talking about the second cup. Tani Namiachi hashotek kiflayim lo yivarech. That the one who drinks double shouldn't bless. Shene'emar mishum shene'emar, because it says Hikol nekrat Elohecha Israel. Prepare yourself to greet your God, O Israel. So what does this mean? What it means, v'hai lo mitkan, and this person is not prepared. So what does it mean? So they had a concept, it's mentioned in Masekhet Pesachim, one day Be'ezrat Hashem will get there, that a concept of zugot, that there was an idea in the times of the Talmud that even numbers were bad. I don't want to say bad luck, that's the wrong term to use, but there was something dangerous about even numbers. So when it came to like the Arba Kosot of Pesach, they had an issue because the Hamon Am, the people, the folk, there was a folk tradition, basically, that Zugot was dangerous, and the people were afraid to do Arba Kosot on Pesach because they didn't want to do any even numbers. So here they're saying that the second cup, you can't have a bracha on that. Now the Rabbeinu Yonah has a couple of different interpretations of what this means. You don't say a bracha on that. One of them is when it says there, Hashotek kiflayim lo yivarech, that the person who's drinking twice, in other words, if this is the second cup for the person, he should not do the zimun. He shouldn't lead the zimun. Because since the second cup, drinking a second cup is considered to be inviting trouble for some reason, therefore the person who did that shouldn't lead the Birkat Hamazon. That's why it says, Hashotek kiflayim lo yivarech. that since he had 2 cups of wine, he shouldn't be the one to lead the zimun, because the fact that he had 2 cups of wine has invited some kind of negative influences that he doesn't want to be. We don't want to have associated with the meal. That's what Rabbeinu Yonah says. The other possibilities here are that it's actually saying that he shouldn't say a bracha of borei pri hagefen on the 2nd cup because it's associated with danger. But there are other problems with that interpretation.
The even numbers in Pesach, is that where the Kos Selyach comes from?
I don't think so. That's something else. Because even the Rambam has that 5th cup, and he definitely didn't have the idea of Zugod. So Amar Rabbi Abahu said, "V'amri la b'matnitatna." Or you'll notice, for example, that there's a custom not to do mosifim of 2. If you have mosifim aliyot, we always say 3, because that's what that was based on. And some say it's in a braita. So Amar Rabbi Abahu v'Amri Lav Matnitatana. So some attribute this to Rabbi Abahu. Some attribute it to a Tosefta. Ha'ochelu me'alech mevarech me'omed. Somebody who's eating and walking, he can say the bracha even standing. Uchshuochel me'omed mevarech me'yushav. But if he's eating standing, when he says the bracha, he should sit down. Uchshu mesev ve'ochel yoshev u'mevarech. But if he's reclining and eating, he should sit up. In other words, the preferred position, obviously, is sitting up, because when you're standing you don't have the same level of kavanah as when you sit down. If you're reclining, it's not kavod, it's not respectable, so you should sit up. In all cases one should sit and say the bracha. The Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch have a little bit of a machloket here. The Rambam says that in all cases, both for Birkat HaMazon and for Ala Mechya, a person should always be seated when saying both of these brachot. Even if the person's walking along the way, they should stop, sit down, and say Birkat HaMazon or Ala Mechya. However, the Shulchan Aruch says, in all cases he agrees with that a person should sit down for Birkat HaMazon, should sit down ideally for Ala Mechya as well. But if you're walking on a trip, he says there you don't have to sit down. Why not? Because you won't really have Yishuv HaDa'at. You won't have the ability to concentrate, the ability to have kavanah, because you're going to feel rushed. Because since you're on a trip and you're traveling, if you stop, you're going to feel that you're going to feel harried. You're not going to be focused. You'll actually focus more by continuing to walk and saying Birkat HaMazon, because you won't feel that you're going to be late to wherever you're going, or you're going to fall behind. So we finished the 7th parak, and we'll start at the beginning of the 8th parak now. These are the matters that Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel argued about regarding a meal. Beit Shammai, many of these are famous, and many of them are found in other places in Shas, in other places in the Talmud, but here we're consolidating and combining them in one Mishnah. But in fact, they are found sporadically dispersed throughout the Shas. Beit Shammai says, according to Beit Shammai, we do Kiddush all wrong. Because really, on Friday night, instead of saying Borei Pri Hagefen and then Baruch Atah Hashem Mikadesh Shabbat, it's the opposite. First you say the blessing, Asher Kiddushan B'Mitzvotav V'Rat Tavanu V'Shabbat Kodeshecha B'Yavav V'Ratan Hinchatanu, etc. And you should, and Baruch Atah Hashem Mikadesh Shabbat, and then Borei Pri Hagefen, and then you drink, according to Beit Shammai. You do it reverse. But according to Beit Hillel, it's like the way that we do it. First you say Borei Pri Hagefen, and then Asher Kiddushan B'Mitzvotav V'Rat Tavanu, etc. Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbat. Beit Shammai omrim Motin Liyadayim B'Achar Kach Mozegin Takos. According to Beit Shammai, you first wash your hands Netilat Yadayim, and then you say the blessing on wine. And we're talking not about Shabbat necessarily, but let's say about a regular meal where you're going to have wine before the meal. He says do Netilat Yadayim before you have your wine, and then do hamotzi. And he would apply that to Shabbat as well. You should wash your hands in Netilat Yadayim, do the kiddush, and then do hamotzi. Ubeit Hillel omrim, Beit Hillel say mozgin takos ve'achar kach notin liyadayim, which is obviously the way that we do it. We first have our wine, and then we go Netilat Yadayim. Beit Shammai omrim mekaneach yadav b'mapa. Beit Shammai says you should wipe your hands on a napkin, umenicha ala shulchan, and you can put it on the table. We're going to see the reasons for these things later. Some of them sound strange. Okay, Beit Hillel omrim ala keset. Beit Shammai says Beit Hillel says you shouldn't put your napkin that you're wiping your hand with after you wash your hands. You shouldn't leave it on the table. You should put it on a pillow next to you. We're going to see the reason for this later in the Gemara. Beit Shammai omrim mechabedin et habayit v'achar kach notin liyadayim. He says you should clean up the crumbs, etc., and then wash your hands in mayim achronim at the end of the meal before you do Birkat Hamazon. According to Beit Hillel, you should actually wash your hands before you clean up the crumbs. Beit Shammai omrim neru mazon b'samim v'havdalah, that when you have only 1 cup of wine, you said Birkat Hamazon, you want to say Birkat Hamazon at Sudah Shlishit and say Havdalah. So you have only 1 cup of wine. So Beit Shammai says the way you do it is like this. Here's the order. First, Borei Meorei Ha'esh, that's Ner, the candle. Then Birkat Hamazon. Then Bisamim. And then the blessing of Havdalah, which is Hamavdil ben Kodesh L'chol. Ubeit Hillel omrim, Neru Bisamim. First you do the candle. Then you do Bisamim. Mazon v'havdalah. Then you do Birkat Hamazon, and then you do Havdalah. So basically, they're arguing about the placement of Bisamim. Is it before Birkat Hamazon or after Birkat Hamazon? And we're going to see the reason for this as well. Beit Shammai omrim shebara me'ora esh. According to Beit Shammai, the blessing is not like we say in Havdalah, borei me'orei ha'esh, but shebara ma'or ha'esh. In the singular. Or Beit Hillel omrim borei me'orei ha'esh, which is the way that we say it, the one who creates the lights of fire, in the plural. Ein mevarchin lo ala ner v'lo ala bisamim shel akum. You should not say a blessing on the candle or on the bisamim that are designated for idolatrous purposes. We're going to see more details about this later. V'lo ala ner v'lo ala bisamim shel metim. If there are candles that are honoring the dead, that are being placed next to a dead body to honor the dead, or there are bisamim around the dead body, you should not make a blessing on them or use them for Havdalah. Velo ala ner velo ala bisamim shel avodah zarah. So there's a difference here between, these are actually being used for avodah zarah. The previous one is shel akum, that belongs to the idolater, and we're going to see why. This one is, because we might suspect that it has some connection to idolatry. This is ones that are actually used for idolatry. So let's say you happen to be in the Catholic Church making Havdalah. You can't take the incense, what do they call it, the censer or whatever he had, of that incense that he carries. You wouldn't be able to use that for bisamim. Or those candles that are on that altar, you can't use those. Okay, that's what we're talking about, of avodah zarah. So you can't use one that's owned by an idolater because perhaps it has some connection to idolatry, and certainly one that's been used or is being used or is designated for idolatry can't be used for that. And you cannot say a blessing on the candle until you benefit from the light. That's why we put our fingers up to the Havdalah candle so we can see a little bit of it. We look at our fingernail so that we benefit from the light before we say the bracha. Somebody who ate a meal and forgot and didn't say Birkat Hamazon. Beit Shammai omrim yachzor limkomo v'varech. He has to go back to wherever he ate and say Birkat Hamazon in the place where he ate. Beit Hillel omrim yivarech b'makom shenizkar. According to Beit Hillel, if you've already left the place and you're somewhere else, say Birkat Hamazon wherever you remember. You don't have to go back once you've already left. V'ad matayim yivarech ad kedei sheyitakel hamazon shebeme'av. How long do you have to say Birkat Hamazon after you've eaten? Until you digest it. So people say, as a rule of thumb, 72 minutes, but really if a person still feels full after an hour, 2 hours, or they could still say Birkat Hamazon, and if they don't feel full even after a half hour, 72 minutes is not going to help them. It really goes by how long you feel full. Balahem yayin achar Hamazon. If they get wine after the meal is over, im en sham ela otokos, Beit Shammai omrim mevarech al yayin v'achar kach mevarech al hamazon. So Beit Hillel says, if you want to drink this wine, first drink the wine and then do Birkat Hamazon. Beit Hillel omrim mevarech al hamazon v'achar kach mevarech al yayin. You should say Birkat Hamazon and then bless on the wine. That way you can use the cup of wine as your cup for Birkat Hamazon. Ve'onin amen achar Yisrael mevarech. If a Jew says a blessing, we say amen after him. Ve'onin amen achar kuti mevarech ad shishma kol ha'beracha kula. However, a kuti that says a beracha, we don't say amen unless we heard the entire beracha. Kutim were people who were placed by Nebuchadnezzar when he threw the Jews, when the Babylonians exiled the Jews and removed them from the land of Israel. They were replaced by the Babylonians with a group of people called the Kutim from a land called Kuta. And this group of Kutim adopted many Jewish practices and took on a Jewish identity because they were afraid that if they didn't keep the commandments of the God of the land, they would be punished by the God of the land, because they knew that was why the Jews had to be exiled. So they were afraid that would happen to them. So they brought a Levi from among the exiles, and he taught them Torah, he taught them the mitzvot, and they accepted Judaism. But and this group is called today the Samaritans. and the Kutim, the Samaritans, or they're called now Shomronim in Hebrew. And there was a machloket, there was an argument going back to the early Mishnaic times whether to treat these Shomronim as Gerei Emet or Gerei Arayot, which means did they convert out of a true belief in Judaism, or did they convert because they were afraid of lions? In other words, it was out of fear and therefore not really valid. Later on, they came to realize that the Kutim were syncretists, which means they took idolatrous practices, kind of like the early Christians. They took idolatrous practices and pagan practices, and they combined it with Jewish practices. So at that point, they started to realize, unless we know a particular Kuti and his beliefs, we can't really rely on him as being a Jew. And eventually, they just said the whole group is not Jewish, but because they had strayed too far from Judaism. But at a certain point, there was still a safek, it was a doubt. So if you had a kuti saying a blessing, you could only say amen if you heard the whole blessing. Because you might be injecting into that blessing some kind of other words or incantations or names of other gods that would be a concern. So you could only say amen if you heard the whole blessing in that case. A Jew, we give him the benefit of the doubt that when he says the baracha, he's saying it to Hashem. So we'll do a little bit of Gemara here. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Dvarim shebein Beit Shammai u Beit Hillel b'suda, things that are between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel in a matter of a meal. Beit Shammai omrim mevarach al hayom v'achar kach mevarach al hayayin. So Beit Shammai says that we reverse the kiddush from the way that we do it, and you say the blessing of Mekadesh Shabbat and then Borei Priya Gefen. What's the reason? Shayom gorem layayin sheyavo. What's the reason you brought wine? Because it's Shabbat, so you should bless the Shabbat before you bless the wine. Ukvar kadash hayom v'adayin yayin lo ba. And oftentimes Shabbat has already started, and you haven't even brought the kiddush yet. So clearly, which takes precedence? Conceptually, the whole reason for having kiddush is that it's Shabbat, so Shabbat should come first. And in terms of order, the thing that appears first is the Shabbat. It's Shabbat, and then you say the kiddush. So that's why the blessing on Shabbat should come first. Beit Hillel omrim mevarech al hayan v'achar kach mevarech al hayom shayayin gorem l'kedusha sheteamer. It might be true, says Beit Hillel, that the reason we're saying kiddush is because it's Shabbat. But let's face it, without wine, there ain't no kiddush. So therefore, wine should come first, because even though it's not the reason, it's indispensable to the process. You can't say kiddush without something, bread or wine. You can also say kiddush on bread, but the point is the same idea. In other words, you would say the hamotzi before. If you said kiddush on bread, which you can do in certain cases where you don't have wine, you still would say the hamotzi first.
In the afternoon.
No, it doesn't work during the day.
Right.
That's a different story. Yeah, because at night, the main beracha is really the blessing of Shabbat. The food, the wine, is just an accompaniment to that. So that's why you can do it over bread. During the day, the only thing you have is Borei Priya Gefen. There's no Baruch Atah Hashem B'Kadesh Shabbat during the day. So he says that therefore, so from a conceptual standpoint, surely Shabbat is more important. But practically speaking, you can't move without the wine. Davar Acher, another version says Berkat Yahayin Tidira. That when you have something that's frequent and infrequent, you go with the thing that's more frequent first. And what's more frequent? Drinking wine or Shabbat? Probably drinking wine, because wine was drunk, especially back then, all the time. And even today, certainly more people are drinking wine than during the week than they are on Shabbat, because 6 days of the week. So for sure, Birkat HaYayin is more common. The blessing on wine is more common than the blessing on Shabbat. So therefore, the wine should come first. And the halacha follows the words of Beit Hillel, as we know. Why did you bring me this extra reason? You already told me the reason for Beit Hillel is because without wine, you wouldn't say kiddush at all. So therefore, wine should come first. Why do you then have to tell me that wine is more common? The blessing on wine is more common than the blessing on Shabbat because it's done more frequently. The answer is because maybe you'll tell me Beit Shammai has two reasons for their argument, because they said, first of all, Shabbat is the whole reason for Kiddush, and second of all, Shabbat appears before Kiddush starts, because it's already Shabbat. There are two reasons, and Beit Hillel only had one reason, so therefore we bring the second reason. So therefore we say that Hachanami Tarte Ninhu Birkat Hayayin Tedira Birkat Hayomi not Tedira Tadir V'Sheno Tadir Kodem. That's why we bring this principle that the more frequent thing takes precedence. So Beit Shammai has two reasons, and Beit Hillel has two reasons as well. And since they're even, we go with Beit Hillel. Halakha Kedivre Beit Hillel. We said that the halakha follows Beit Hillel. Pshita. What do you mean? This is a new idea? We always follow Beit Hillel. Nafka, so it says that Nafka Bat Kol, because there was a divine voice that came out to declare the halacha is going to be like Beit Hillel. Ibayit ema kodem Bat Kol. So it could be that when they said this teaching, that the halacha follows Beit Hillel, it was before that Bat Kol, before the divine revelation, so to speak, that the halacha should follow Beit Hillel. So they had to tell you that the halacha followed Beit Hillel. Ibayit ema lachar Bat Kol. Or it could be that even after that divine voice came out and told us that Beit Hillel is always the one who wins every debate. Still, Rabbi Yehoshuahi. It could be that it's Rabbi Yehoshuahi, it's Rabbi Yehoshua, Damar en mashkichin bevat kol. Because according to Rabbi Yehoshua, we don't listen to a bat kol. That is the famous story of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua, where Rabbi Eliezer says the world, the carob tree is going to prove that I'm right, and the river is going to flow backwards, and the walls of the Beit Midrash are going to cave in, and he invokes all of these different supernatural phenomena to back up his position about the Tanur Shel Achnai, it's called, the famous story in Bava Metzia. And then finally he says a divine voice is going to come and say that I'm right. And the divine voice came out and said, he's right. And yet the people said, sorry, we don't listen to a bat kol, we don't listen to a divine voice. And that was Rabbi Yehoshua leading the opposition. So therefore, according to him, even though a bat kol might have come and said that we always follow Beit Hillel, he says, hey, wait a second. Every case has to be judged on its own merits. We don't listen to a bat kol. Yeah, lo b'shamayim, it's not in heaven. And therefore we needed to be told that when it comes to the order of the blessings of Kiddush, it is, the halacha follows Beit Hillel. And what a very timely and appropriate way to conclude this Erev Shabbat. Chazak Baruch.